The August sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty platform of the Oregon City train station in 1878, and Franklin Reed noticed her the moment he rode past, a young woman sitting alone on a wooden bench with a traveling case beside her and a look of pure desperation etched across her pale face. Franklin had spent the better part of 3 years working cattle drives from Texas to Montana, and he prided himself on his ability to read situations quickly. Something about the way this woman sat perfectly still, her shoulders rigid with tension while her fingers worried the fabric of her traveling dress, told him she was in trouble. He dismounted from his bay mare and tied the reins to the hitching post, removing his dusty hat as he approached. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice gentler than most would expect from a man who stood over 6 feet tall with hands calloused from years of ranch work. "Are you waiting for someone?" She looked up at him with eyes the color of spring grass, and he saw fear flicker across her face before she composed herself. "I was supposed to meet my cousin here," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But she never came, and I've been waiting since yesterday morning." Franklin felt his jaw tighten. "No one should be stranded here," he said firmly. "This station gets dangerous after dark, and it is not the kind of place for a young lady to spend the night alone." Her shoulders sagged with relief at his concern, and he noticed the way exhaustion lined her delicate features. "I do not know what else to do," she admitted. "I traveled all the way from Boston, and I spent most of my money on the train fare. My cousin Victoria was supposed to have a teaching position arranged for me here, but there is no sign of her, and no one at the station office knows anything about her." Franklin crouched down so he was at eye level with her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "My name is Franklin Reed. I work at the Riverside Ranch about 5 miles outside of town. The owner's wife, Mrs. Catherine Holloway, is a good Christian woman who would be happy to offer you a place to stay until we can figure out what happened to your cousin." "I could not possibly impose," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "It would be no imposition at all," Franklin assured her. "What's your name?" "Vivian Turner," she said, extending her hand hesitantly, "and I am grateful for your kindness, Mr. Reed." Her hand felt small and cold in his, despite the oppressive heat. Franklin picked up her traveling case, which weighed almost nothing, and offered his other arm to help her stand. "Can you ride?" he asked. Vivian shook her head. "I never learned." "That is all right. We'll walk the horse into town proper, and I will rent a wagon from the livery. You look like you could use some food and water first, though." The gratitude in her eyes made something in Franklin's chest tighten. He led her down the dusty main street of Oregon City, acutely aware of the curious stares they attracted. Vivian kept her chin high despite her obvious discomfort, and Franklin found himself admiring her composure. The restaurant was nearly empty at this late afternoon hour, and the owner's wife, a plump woman named Martha, took one look at Vivian and immediately brought over a pitcher of cool water and a plate of bread and butter. "You poor dear," Martha said, her motherly instincts clearly aroused. "You look absolutely parched." Vivian drank 2 full glasses of water before she even touched the food, and Franklin ordered her a proper meal of roasted chicken, potatoes, and green beans. While they waited, he asked gentle questions about her journey. "My father died 6 months ago," Vivian explained, her voice steady despite the painful subject. "He was a schoolteacher in Boston, and he left me with very little. My mother passed when I was young, so I have no other family except my cousin Victoria. She wrote to me 3 months ago saying she had secured a teaching position for me at a school here in Oregon City, and that I should come as soon as I could arrange passage." "Did you write back to confirm?" Franklin asked. "Of course," Vivian said. "I sent 3 letters, but I never received responses. I thought perhaps she was simply busy, or that the mail was slow. I never imagined she might not be here at all." Franklin frowned. "Do you have the letters she sent you?" Vivian retrieved a small bundle of envelopes from her bag, and Franklin read through them carefully. The handwriting was feminine and neat, and the return address listed a boarding house on 7th Street. "After you eat, we will go to this address," he said. "If your cousin ever stayed there, someone will remember her." The food seemed to revive Vivian somewhat, bringing color back to her pale cheeks. Franklin found himself studying her features when she was not looking, noting the delicate curve of her jaw and the way her dark hair, though disheveled from travel, still managed to look elegant pinned up beneath her simple hat. She was beautiful, he realized, but it was more than that. There was an intelligence in her eyes and a quiet strength in the way she carried herself despite her circumstances. After the meal, which Franklin insisted on paying for despite Vivian's protests, they walked to the boarding house on 7th Street. The building was well maintained, with flower boxes in the windows and a freshly painted sign that read, "Mrs. Donnelly's Respectable Lodgings for Ladies." An elderly woman answered their knock, peering at them through wire-rimmed spectacles. "Can I help you?" "We are looking for information about a woman named Victoria Turner," Franklin said. "She may have stayed here within the past few months." Mrs. Donnelly's expression shifted to one of concern. "Oh dear, you had better come inside." They followed her into a neat parlor, and she gestured for them to sit on a well-worn sofa. "Victoria Turner stayed here for about 2 months," Mrs. Donnelly said. "Sweet girl, very quiet. She was working as a seamstress while she looked for teaching work." "Was?" Vivian's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry, dear," Mrs. Donnelly said, her eyes filled with genuine sympathy. "Victoria fell ill with pneumonia about 6 weeks ago. She passed away at the hospital despite the doctor's best efforts. I tried to find information about her family to notify them, but she had very little among her possessions. There was no address book, no letters, nothing to indicate where she came from." Vivian's face went white, and Franklin instinctively reached for her hand. She gripped his fingers tightly, and he felt her trembling. "She was the only family I had left," Vivian said, her voice breaking. "I'm truly sorry," Mrs. Donnelly repeated. "If it helps at all, she did not suffer long. The fever took her quickly." Franklin gave Vivian a moment to compose herself before he asked, "Did Victoria leave any belongings?" "The hospital took what little she had to cover the costs of her care," Mrs. Donnelly said. "I'm afraid there is nothing left." They thanked Mrs. Donnelly and left, and Franklin guided Vivian to a bench outside a general store. She sat down heavily, and for the first time, tears spilled down her cheeks. "I have nothing," she said. "No family, no money, no position. I do not even have enough for train fare back to Boston. Not that there is anything for me there." Franklin sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance but offering his handkerchief. "You have somewhere to stay," he said firmly. "Mrs. Holloway will help you. She has connections throughout the county, and if there are any teaching positions available, she will know about them. You are not alone in this, Miss Turner." Vivian looked at him with those green eyes swimming in tears, and Franklin felt something shift in his chest. He had known this woman for barely 3 hours, but already he felt a fierce protectiveness toward her. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked. "You do not even know me." "Because it is the right thing to do," Franklin said simply, "and because no one deserves to face circumstances like yours without help." They sat in silence for a few minutes while Vivian composed herself, and then Franklin stood and offered his hand. "Come on," he said. "Let us get that wagon and head to the ranch. You need proper rest, and tomorrow we will figure out the next steps." The ride to Riverside Ranch took about 40 minutes, and Franklin used the time to tell Vivian about the place she would be staying. "Thomas Holloway owns about 3,000 acres, he explained. "He runs cattle and horses and employs about 15 men year-round. I have been his foreman for the past year. Mrs. Catherine Holloway is from a wealthy family back east, but she adapted to ranch life better than anyone expected. She is involved in every charitable organization in the county, and she has helped more than a few people get back on their feet." "She sounds remarkable," Vivian said. "She is," Franklin agreed. "Her daughter Lily is 7 years old, bright as a button and always getting into mischief. I think you will like them both." The ranch came into view as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The main house was a sprawling 2-story structure built from local timber with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Several outbuildings dotted the property, including a large barn, a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, and various sheds and corrals. Catherine Holloway emerged from the house as Franklin pulled the wagon to a stop, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a handsome woman in her mid-30s with auburn hair and a warm smile. "Franklin," she called out, "I was not expecting you back until tomorrow." "I apologize for arriving unannounced, Mrs. Holloway," Franklin said, helping Vivian down from the wagon. "But I encountered a situation in town that requires your help." Catherine's expression shifted to one of concern as she took in Vivian's bedraggled appearance and obvious distress. Come inside immediately, she said, taking Vivian's arm. You look exhausted, my dear. Franklin, have one of the men take care of the wagon, and then join us in the house. I want to hear everything. The interior of the ranch house was comfortable and welcoming, with hardwood floors covered in colorful rugs and furniture that showed signs of daily use. Catherine led them to the kitchen, where she immediately put a kettle on for tea and sliced fresh bread for sandwiches. Now then, she said, settling into a chair across from Vivian, tell me what has happened. Franklin let Vivian tell the story herself, only interjecting when necessary to fill in details. Catherine listened intently, her expression growing more sympathetic with each revelation. When Vivian finished, Catherine reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You poor dear, she said. What an absolutely dreadful series of circumstances. Of course you will stay here as long as you need. We have a spare room on the second floor that will suit you perfectly. I cannot accept charity, Vivian said, though her voice lacked strength. I need to find work so I can support myself. It is not charity, Catherine said firmly. You are clearly educated, and heaven knows Lily could benefit from some proper instruction. Her father and I have been teaching her ourselves, but we are not trained educators. If you would be willing to tutor her, and perhaps help me with some of the household management tasks, we would be happy to provide you room and board plus a small salary. Vivian's eyes widened. Are you serious? Completely, Catherine said. I will be honest with you, Miss Turner. Running a ranch this size is exhausting work, and I've been looking for someone to help me manage the household for months. Most of the local women are busy with their own families, and the few candidates I have interviewed were either unsuitable or uninterested. You would be doing me a tremendous favor. Franklin watched the exchange with a growing sense of relief. He had known Catherine would help, but he had not expected her to offer Vivian actual employment. Mrs. Holloway is not exaggerating, he said. She has been running herself ragged trying to manage everything. Then I accept, Vivian said, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Thank you so much. I do not know how I will ever repay your kindness. Nonsense, Catherine said briskly. Now, let us get you settled. Franklin, would you bring Miss Turner's case upstairs, the blue room at the end of the hall? Franklin carried the light traveling case up the polished staircase, acutely aware of Vivian following behind him. The blue room was charming, with wallpaper patterned with small flowers and a large window overlooking the eastern pastures. A comfortable bed dominated the space, covered in a quilted bedspread that Catherine had probably made herself. This is lovely, Vivian said softly, running her hand along the smooth wooden dresser. I will leave you to settle in, Franklin said. If you need anything, just ask Mrs. Holloway. Dinner is usually at 6 o'clock in the main dining room. He turned to leave, but Vivian's voice stopped him. Mr. Reed? Thank you. You saved my life today. I truly believe that. Franklin felt heat rise in his cheeks, and he nodded awkwardly before retreating. As he made his way back downstairs, he found Catherine waiting for him in the front hall. That was well done, Franklin, she said quietly. You have a good heart. Anyone would have helped her, Franklin said. You and I both know that is not true, Catherine replied. Many people would have walked right past her, and she would be spending another night at that station, vulnerable to all manner of dangers. You did the right thing bringing her here. She seems like a good person, Franklin said. Educated, well-spoken. I think she will work out well. Catherine gave him a knowing look that made him uncomfortable. I think so too, she said. Now, go get yourself cleaned up for dinner. You look like you have been rolling in the dust all day. Over the next few weeks, Vivian settled into life at Riverside Ranch with surprising ease. She proved to be an excellent teacher, and young Lily took to her immediately. Franklin often heard the sound of laughter drifting from the small room that had been converted into a schoolroom, and he found himself making excuses to pass by during lessons. Vivian also threw herself into helping Catherine manage the household, and her organizational skills quickly became invaluable. She created systems for tracking supplies, organized the root cellar, and even negotiated better prices with the merchants in town. Catherine openly admitted that she did not know how she had managed without Vivian. Franklin saw Vivian every day, usually at meals and sometimes in the evenings when everyone gathered in the parlor. He found himself looking forward to these interactions more than he cared to admit. Vivian was intelligent and well-read, and she could discuss everything from literature to politics with equal ease. She also had a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard and made him laugh. One evening in mid-September, Franklin was repairing a section of fence near the house when Vivian approached, carrying a pitcher of lemonade and 2 glasses. "I thought you might be thirsty," she said. "You've been working out here for hours." "That's very thoughtful," Franklin said, accepting the glass gratefully. The lemonade was cold and tart, and he drank half of it in one long swallow. "Perfect." Vivian smiled, and Franklin noticed how much healthier she looked than when they first met. The hollowness had left her cheeks, and her skin had taken on a healthy glow from spending time outdoors. "I wanted to thank you again," she said. "I know I have said it before, but I do not think I have adequately expressed my gratitude for what you did. You changed my entire life that day at the station." "You have thanked me plenty," Franklin said, feeling awkward, "and you have more than earned your place here. Mrs. Holloway says you are the best thing that has happened to this household in years." "She is very kind," Vivian said. "I have grown quite fond of her and Lily. This place feels more like home than anywhere I have lived since my father died." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sun sink lower on the horizon. Finally, Vivian said, "May I ask you something personal, Mr. Reed?" "Of course, and please, call me Franklin." "Why is a man like you not married?" Vivian asked, then immediately blushed. "I apologize, that was far too forward of me." Franklin chuckled. "No, it is a fair question. The truth is, I have spent most of my adult life on cattle drives and working ranches. It is not the kind of life that lends itself to courtship or family. I have met plenty of women, but none that ever made me want to settle down." "And now?" Vivian asked softly. Franklin met her eyes and felt his heart rate accelerate. "Now I'm starting to see the appeal of putting down roots," he admitted. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings, until Lily's voice shattered it. "Miss Turner, Papa says you have to come see the new foal." Vivian turned toward the barn, where Lily was jumping up and down with excitement. "I should go," she said, but there was something in her expression that made Franklin think she was as reluctant to leave as he was to see her go. "Of course," Franklin said. "Thank you for the lemonade." He watched her walk toward the barn, her skirts swaying gently, and realized with startling clarity that he was falling in love with her. The autumn months passed in a blur of activity. The ranch prepared for winter, and Franklin oversaw the work of bringing the cattle down from the high pastures and ensuring all the buildings were properly weatherproofed. Vivian continued her teaching duties with Lily and took on increasing responsibilities in managing the household. Franklin and Vivian fell into a pattern of spending time together whenever possible. He taught her to ride, first on the gentlest mare in the stable, and she proved to be a quick learner. They took rides through the property on Sunday afternoons, and Franklin showed her all his favorite spots, including a hidden meadow filled with wildflowers and a creek that ran clear and cold even in the heat of summer. They talked about everything during these rides. Vivian told him about growing up in Boston, about her father's dedication to education and her mother's love of music. Franklin shared stories from his cattle drive days, carefully editing out the more dangerous or unseemly details. He found himself telling her things he had never shared with anyone, about his dreams of eventually owning his own ranch, and his fears that he had spent too many years drifting to ever truly settle down. "I do not think it is ever too late to change the direction of your life," Vivian said during one of these conversations. "Look at me. 2 months ago, I was alone and destitute at a train station, and now I have a home, meaningful work, and friends I care about deeply." "Is that all we are?" Franklin asked, the question escaping before he could stop himself. "Friends?" Vivian looked at him, and he saw his own feelings reflected in her eyes. "I hope we are more than that," she said quietly. "Or at least, I hope we might become more." Franklin stopped his horse and dismounted, then helped Vivian down from her mare. They stood close together, and he could see the slight tremor in her hands as he took them in his own. "Vivian," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I've been trying to find the right words to tell you how I feel, but I'm not a man who is good with pretty speeches. All I know is that from the moment I saw you at that station, something in my life shifted. You are the first thing I think about when I wake up, and the last thing on my mind before I sleep. You have made me want things I never thought I could have." "What things?" Vivian whispered. "A wife," Franklin said. "A family. A real home instead of just a place to lay my head at night. I know it is too soon, and I know you might not feel the same way, but I needed you to know." Vivian reached up and touched his face, her palm warm against his cheek. "It is not too soon," she said, "and I do feel the same way. I think I started falling in love with you that first day, when you looked at me with such kindness and said that no one should be stranded at that station. You made me feel safe when my entire world was falling apart." Franklin pulled her close and kissed her, gentle at first and then with growing passion. Vivian melted against him, her arms wrapping around his neck. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Franklin rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Vivian Turner," he said. "I want to marry you, if you will have me." "Yes," Vivian said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, absolutely yes." They sealed their engagement with another kiss, and then rode back to the ranch hand in hand, their hearts full of joy and their futures bright with possibility. Thomas and Catherine Holloway were delighted by the news of the engagement, and Catherine immediately began planning a wedding. "It will be a November wedding," she declared. "We will have it here at the ranch, and we will invite everyone we know. This calls for a proper celebration." The next 6 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Vivian continued her teaching duties and household management work, but Catherine insisted she take time each day to work on her wedding dress. Several of the ranch hands' wives came to help with the sewing, and Franklin often came home to find the parlor filled with women and fabric. Franklin used this time to work on preparing a home for his future bride. Thomas had offered him 5 acres of ranch land as a wedding present, with the option to purchase more when he was ready. Franklin chose a spot near the creek where wildflowers grew in abundance, and he spent every spare moment clearing land and beginning construction on a small but sturdy house. Several of the ranch hands volunteered their time to help with the construction, and the house came together faster than Franklin had dared hope. It was a simple structure with 2 bedrooms, a main living area, and a kitchen, but Franklin built it with care and attention to detail. He installed large windows to let in plenty of light, and he constructed a wide front porch where he imagined spending evenings with Vivian. The wedding took place on a crisp November afternoon with the entire community in attendance. Vivian looked breathtaking in her cream-colored wedding dress, which featured delicate lace trim that Catherine had ordered from San Francisco. Franklin wore a new suit that he had purchased specially for the occasion, and he felt his throat tighten with emotion as Vivian walked toward him on Thomas Holloway's arm. The ceremony was conducted by a traveling preacher who happened to be passing through Oregon City, and Franklin spoke his vows in a clear, strong voice. "I promise to love you, protect you, and cherish you for all the days of my life," he said, looking into Vivian's eyes. "You have given me a reason to build a future, and I will spend that future making you happy." Vivian's vows were equally heartfelt. "I promise to stand beside you through whatever challenges life brings," she said. "You saved me when I had nothing, and you loved me when I felt unlovable. I will love you forever, Franklin Reed." The celebration that followed the ceremony was joyous and boisterous. Catherine had organized a feast with contributions from neighbors throughout the county, and there was enough food to feed an army. Musicians played fiddles and guitars, and Franklin danced with his new wife until his feet ached. As the evening drew to a close, Franklin and Vivian said their goodbyes and rode together to their new home. Franklin had lit lanterns throughout the house earlier in the day, and the warm glow welcomed them as they crossed the threshold together. "Welcome home, Mrs. Reed," Franklin said, lifting Vivian in his arms and carrying her inside. The house was simply furnished with items they had collected over the past weeks, but it was comfortable and clean. Franklin set Vivian down gently in the main living area, and she turned in a slow circle, taking everything in. "It is perfect," she said, "absolutely perfect." "It is ours," Franklin said, wrapping his arms around her from behind, "and tomorrow we start building our life together." They made love that night with tenderness and passion, and Franklin marveled at how completely his life had changed in just a few short months. He fell asleep with Vivian curled against his side, her head resting on his chest, and he knew he had finally found where he belonged. The winter months tested them in ways Franklin had not anticipated. A severe storm hit in late December, bringing snow and ice that made travel treacherous and work on the ranch nearly impossible. Franklin and Vivian spent long days and nights huddled by the fire, and he learned to appreciate the simple pleasure of domestic life. Vivian proved to be a capable homemaker, and she adapted to ranch life with impressive resilience. She learned to cook on the wood stove, to preserve food for the winter, and to handle the dozens of small crises that arose from living in relative isolation. Franklin found himself falling more deeply in love with her every day. They also learned to navigate the challenges of marriage. There were disagreements, mostly minor, about household management and finances. Vivian wanted to save every penny for the future, while Franklin believed in enjoying the present. They learned to compromise, and Franklin discovered that making up after an argument could be surprisingly pleasant. By the time spring arrived, Vivian had news that filled Franklin with equal parts joy and terror. "I am pregnant," she told him one April evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "The baby should arrive in late October." Franklin pulled her close and kissed her forehead, his heart racing. "That is wonderful news," he said. "Terrifying, but wonderful." Vivian laughed. "I feel the same way. I have no experience with babies, and I worry that I will not be a good mother." "You will be an excellent mother," Franklin assured her. "Look at how well you do with Lily, and I promise I will be here every step of the way." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though the summer heat made Vivian uncomfortable in her final months. Catherine visited frequently, bringing advice and supplies, and several of the ranch wives stopped by to share their own experiences and wisdom. Franklin did everything he could to make Vivian comfortable, taking over most of the household chores and insisting she rest as much as possible. In late October, just as the leaves were turning brilliant shades of red and gold, Vivian went into labor. Catherine arrived quickly with the local midwife, and Franklin spent the longest hours of his life pacing outside the bedroom door, listening to Vivian's cries of pain and feeling utterly helpless. Finally, just as the sun was rising on a new day, the midwife emerged with a bundle wrapped in soft blankets. "You have a son," she said, beaming. "A healthy, strong boy. Your wife did beautifully." Franklin took the baby with shaking hands, staring down at the tiny face with wonder. The boy had dark hair like his mother and what appeared to be his father's strong jaw. "Hello, little one," Franklin whispered. "Welcome to the world." Catherine appeared in the doorway. "Vivian is asking for you," she said. "Go on. We will take care of the baby for a moment." Franklin found Vivian propped up against pillows, looking exhausted but radiant. "We have a son," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "We do," Franklin agreed, sitting on the edge of the bed and taking her hand. "You are so brave. I am in awe of you." "I want to name him after your father," Vivian said, "if that is all right with you." Franklin felt his throat tighten. His father had died when Franklin was 12, and he rarely spoke about him. "His name was Frederick," Franklin said. "Frederick James Reed." "Then that is what we will call our son," Vivian said. "Frederick James Reed." The next months were a blur of sleepless nights and new responsibilities. Frederick proved to be a hungry baby with powerful lungs, and both Franklin and Vivian struggled to adapt to the constant demands of parenthood. But there was also immense joy in watching their son grow and change, in seeing his first smile and hearing his first laugh. Franklin found himself working harder than ever to provide for his growing family. He took on extra responsibilities at the ranch, and he also began buying cattle of his own with the goal of eventually expanding their small property into a proper ranch. Thomas Holloway was generous with advice and support, and Franklin felt grateful every day for the opportunity he had been given. Vivian resumed her teaching duties with Lily once Frederick was old enough, and she also began teaching several other children from neighboring ranches. The small schoolroom Franklin had added onto their house was often filled with the sound of young voices reciting lessons, and Franklin loved coming home to that sound. 2 years after Frederick's birth, Vivian became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was more difficult, and she struggled with exhaustion and nausea throughout the first few months. Franklin worried constantly, but Catherine assured him that every pregnancy was different and that Vivian was healthy and strong. In June of 1882, Vivian gave birth to twin girls. Franklin held his daughters, one in each arm, and felt his heart expand in ways he had not thought possible. "What should we name them?" he asked Vivian. "I was thinking Flora and Francis," Vivian said, "after my mother and your grandmother." "Perfect," Franklin agreed. Life with 3 children under the age of 4 was chaotic and exhausting, but Franklin had never been happier. He watched Vivian blossom into motherhood, marveling at her patience and creativity. She sang to the children constantly, made up elaborate stories to entertain them, and somehow managed to keep the household running smoothly, despite the constant demands on her time and energy. Franklin expanded their house to accommodate the growing family, adding 2 more bedrooms and enlarging the kitchen. He also purchased an additional 50 acres from Thomas Holloway and began building his own herd of cattle. The work was backbreaking and the hours were long, but Franklin loved every minute of it. By 1885, Franklin owned 200 head of cattle and employed 3 full-time ranch hands. He had also gained a reputation as one of the most honest and hard-working ranchers in the county, and buyers sought out his cattle specifically. The Reed family was prospering, and Franklin knew it was all because of the partnership he had with Vivian. Frederick was now 6 years old, a bright and curious boy who followed his father everywhere and asked endless questions about ranching and animals. The twins were 4, completely different in personality but inseparable. Flora was quiet and thoughtful, while Frances was bold and adventurous. Vivian managed to give each child individual attention while also running the household and teaching a growing number of students. One evening in late summer, Franklin came home to find Vivian sitting on the porch looking pensive. "What is wrong?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Nothing is wrong," Vivian said. "I was just thinking about how different my life is from what I imagined it would be. If you had not stopped at that station 4 years ago, I have no idea where I would be now. Probably working some menial job in Boston, alone and unhappy." "But I did stop," Franklin said. "And now we have this beautiful life together." "I know," Vivian said, "and I am grateful every single day. I just wanted you to know that. Sometimes I think I do not tell you often enough how much I love you and appreciate everything you do for our family." Franklin pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "You show me every day," he said, "in 1,000 small ways. I am the lucky one, Vivian. You took a chance on a rough cowboy with more dreams than sense, and you helped me build something real and lasting." They sat together as the sun set, watching their children play in the yard. Frederick was teaching the twins how to catch grasshoppers, and their laughter filled the evening air. Franklin thought back to that hot August day at the train station when he had seen a lost young woman and made the decision to help her. It had seemed like such a small thing at the time, just basic human decency, but it had changed both their lives forever. The years continued to pass in a blur of work and family life. Frederick grew into a capable young man who showed real aptitude for ranching, and the twins developed their own distinct interests. Flora loved books and learning, showing promise as a future teacher like her mother. Frances was fascinated by animals and spent every spare moment in the barn or the pastures. In 1889, Vivian surprised Franklin with the news that she was pregnant again at age 32. "I thought we were done," she said with a laugh, but apparently life had other plans. This pregnancy was easier than the twins had been, and in March of 1890, Vivian gave birth to another son. They named him Thomas, after Thomas Holloway, who had become like a father to Franklin over the years. The older man was deeply moved by the honor, and he doted on his namesake with obvious affection. Frederick was now 11 and a tremendous help with his younger siblings. He had inherited his father's steady temperament and his mother's intelligence, and Franklin often thought about what the future might hold for his eldest son. The twins were 8 and full of energy, keeping Vivian constantly on her toes. Baby Thomas was a quiet, content child who seemed happy to observe the chaos around him. Franklin's ranch had grown to 500 acres and 300 head of cattle. He had built a proper barn and bunkhouse, and he employed 6 full-time ranch hands plus seasonal workers during roundup. The Reed Ranch, as it had become known, was one of the most successful operations in the county, and Franklin was frequently asked for advice by other ranchers. But despite all his professional success, Franklin's greatest pride was his family. He made sure to spend time with each of his children individually, teaching Frederick the skills he would need to eventually run the ranch, reading with Flora, riding with Frances, and playing simple games with Thomas. Vivian continued to teach, though she had cut back her hours to focus more on raising Thomas. Her reputation as an excellent educator had spread throughout the region, and families traveled significant distances to enroll their children in her classes. Several of her former students had gone on to attend universities back east, a remarkable achievement for children from rural Oregon. One Saturday afternoon in the spring of 1893, Franklin took Vivian on a ride to the meadow where he had proposed to her all those years ago. They left the children in Catherine's capable care and rode out together, enjoying the rare moment of solitude. The meadow was in full bloom, carpeted with wildflowers in every color imaginable. "Do you remember the first time I brought you here?" Franklin asked as they dismounted. "Huh, of course," Vivian said. "I remember thinking I had never seen anything so beautiful. I also remember being terrified that you could hear how loudly my heart was beating." Franklin laughed. "I was just as nervous. I'd rehearsed what I wanted to say a dozen times, but when I looked at you, all those carefully prepared words flew right out of my head." They spread a blanket on the soft grass and sat together, hands intertwined. "Do you ever regret it?" Franklin asked. "Staying here, I mean. You could have gone back east, found a position at a prestigious school, lived a much more comfortable life." Vivian turned to face him fully. "Franklin Reed, I have never regretted a single decision I made after meeting you. This life, this family we have built together, is everything I could have ever wanted. I love you more today than I did the day we married, and I did not think that was possible." Franklin kissed her deeply, pouring 15 years of love and gratitude into the gesture. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "I love you, Vivian," he said. "Thank you for taking a chance on me." "Thank you for stopping at that station," Vivian replied. "Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible, for offering help when I had no right to expect it, and for loving me so completely and constantly." They stayed in the meadow until the sun began to set, talking about their dreams for the future and making plans for the years ahead. Franklin wanted to expand the ranch even further, perhaps purchasing the property adjacent to theirs that was rumored to be for sale. Vivian wanted to establish a proper school building so she could teach more children and offer a more comprehensive education. As they rode back toward home, Franklin reflected on the strange and wonderful path his life had taken. He had spent so many years drifting, never really belonging anywhere. And then one hot August day, he had encountered a lost young woman at a train station. That single act of kindness had led to love, marriage, children, and a life richer than anything he could have imagined. The years continued to flow by, marked by the growth of their children and the steady expansion of the ranch. Frederick turned 18 in 1896 and took on increasing responsibilities, effectively becoming Franklin's partner in running the ranch. He was a good man, hard-working and honorable, and Franklin was immensely proud of him. The twins were 15 and preparing to finish their formal education with their mother. Flora had already been accepted to a teaching college in Portland, following in Vivian's footsteps. Frances had announced her intention to become a veterinarian, a bold ambition for a young woman, but one that both Franklin and Vivian supported wholeheartedly. Thomas was 6 years old, a sweet-natured boy who loved nothing more than helping in the garden that Vivian had cultivated over the years. He had his mother's gentle disposition and his father's quiet strength, and Franklin often found himself watching the boy with a mixture of pride and wonder. In 1898, tragedy struck when Thomas Holloway passed away suddenly from a heart condition. Franklin and his entire family mourned the loss of the man who had given Franklin his start and become like family to them all. Catherine leaned heavily on Vivian during this difficult time, and the friendship between the two women deepened even further. Thomas had left the ranch to his daughter Lily, who was now a capable woman of 27 and married to one of the ranch hands. She and her husband ran Riverside Ranch with the same integrity and generosity that Thomas had shown, and they maintained the close relationship with Franklin and his family. As the new century dawned in 1900, Franklin found himself reflecting on the past 2 decades with a sense of deep satisfaction. He was 45 years old now, with some gray in his hair and lines on his face earned from years of working outdoors. But he was healthy, happy, and surrounded by people he loved. Vivian was 43, and Franklin thought she was more beautiful than ever. Time had only enhanced her elegance, and she carried herself with a grace and confidence that made heads turn whenever they went to town. She had fulfilled her dream of building a proper schoolhouse on their property, and she now taught more than 30 students from throughout the region. Frederick had married a young woman named Sarah from a neighboring ranch, and they had recently welcomed Franklin and Vivian's first grandchild, a baby girl named Elizabeth. Watching his son become a father filled Franklin with a joy so profound it sometimes brought tears to his eyes. Flora was teaching at a school in Portland and thriving in the city environment. She wrote letters home every week, full of details about her students and her life. Frances had indeed pursued her dream of becoming a veterinarian, though she had to fight significant prejudice to gain acceptance to a program. She was currently studying in San Francisco and came home whenever she could. Thomas was 10 years old and showing signs of becoming a talented artist. He filled sketchbooks with drawings of the ranch, the animals, and his family, and Vivian proudly displayed his work throughout their home. One evening in the summer of 1902, Franklin and Vivian sat on their porch watching the sunset, as they had done countless times over the years. Their grandchildren, Elizabeth and her newborn baby brother William, were playing in the yard under Frederick's watchful eye. The sounds of family surrounded them, and Franklin felt a contentment so complete it was almost overwhelming. "Can you believe it has been 24 years since we met?" Vivian asked, her head resting on Franklin's shoulder. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday," Franklin said. "Other times it feels like we have always been together." "I was thinking today about that girl sitting at the train station," Vivian said softly. "She was so scared and alone, with no idea what the future held. If someone had told her that she would end up here with this beautiful family and this wonderful life, she never would have believed it." "That girl had more strength than she knew," Franklin said. "She just needed someone to give her a chance." "And that someone was you," Vivian said, lifting her head to look at him. "You were my miracle, Franklin Reed, my hero in dusty cowboy boots who saw someone in need and decided to help." Franklin kissed her gently. "You were my miracle too," he said. "You taught me what it meant to have roots, to belong somewhere. Before you, I was just drifting through life. You gave me purpose." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple. Flora had come home for a visit and was inside preparing dinner, filling the house with delicious smells and the sound of her cheerful singing. Frances had also returned for the summer, and she was in the barn tending to a horse with an injured leg. Thomas was probably in his room drawing, losing himself in his art the way he often did. "Do you think we should add on to the house again?" Vivian asked suddenly. "Flora mentioned that she might move back to Oregon City if a teaching position opens up, and Frances talks about eventually opening a veterinary practice somewhere nearby. If the children come back with families of their own, we will need more space." Franklin chuckled. "We started with 2 rooms, and now we have 8. I suppose we could always build more, though at some point, we might need to start building separate houses." "I like that idea," Vivian said. "A family compound of sorts. That way everyone can have their independence but still be close by." "Then that is what we will do," Franklin said. "We have enough land, and heaven knows I have the experience building houses now." They continued making plans as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, talking about the future with the same excitement and optimism they had brought to every stage of their lives together. Franklin thought about all the challenges they had faced over the years, the hardships and setbacks, and how they had overcome each one together. There had been difficult seasons when the weather destroyed crops or sickness swept through the cattle. There had been financial struggles in the early years when every penny had to be carefully accounted for. There had been moments of doubt and fear, times when Franklin wondered if he was doing right by his family. But through it all, Vivian had been his constant, his anchor, his partner in every sense of the word. She had celebrated his successes and comforted him through his failures. She had challenged him when he needed it and supported him when he doubted himself. She had given him 4 remarkable children and built a home that was filled with love and laughter. As the years continued to pass, the Reed family continued to grow and prosper. Flora did return to Oregon City in 1904, taking a position as headmistress at a new school, and she married a local lawyer named James. They had 3 children in quick succession, adding to the growing number of grandchildren that Franklin and Vivian adored. Frances returned in 1906 and opened the first veterinary practice in the county. Her skill with animals was extraordinary, and she quickly built a successful business despite the continued prejudice she faced as a woman in a male-dominated profession. She married a widower rancher named Daniel, who had a young daughter, and she proved to be as skilled at step-parenting as she was at veterinary medicine. Thomas, the youngest, showed no interest in ranching or traditional pursuits. Instead, he pursued his art, and by age 16, he was selling paintings to clients throughout Oregon and beyond. Franklin and Vivian supported his passion, even though Franklin sometimes struggled to understand how someone could make a living with a paintbrush and canvas. But Thomas thrived, and his talent brought joy to countless people. Frederick and Sarah took over more and more of the daily operations of the ranch as Franklin gradually stepped back. By 1910, Franklin was officially retired, though he still helped out when needed and offered advice whenever Frederick asked for it. He spent his days working in the garden with Vivian, playing with his grandchildren, and enjoying the fruits of a lifetime of hard work. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1908, Franklin organized a celebration that brought together everyone they loved. The entire extended family gathered at the ranch, along with friends and neighbors from throughout the county. Catherine Holloway, now in her 70s but still sharp as ever, gave a toast that brought tears to many eyes. 30 years ago, I watched two people who were virtual strangers make vows to love and cherish each other, Catherine said, raising her glass. I've had the privilege of watching them keep those vows every single day since. Franklin and Vivian have built something truly remarkable. Not just a successful ranch, but a family bound together by love, respect, and genuine affection. They have shown all of us what a true partnership looks like, and they have made this community a better place simply by being part of it. Franklin stood and pulled Vivian to her feet, wrapping his arm around her waist. 30 years ago, I saw a young woman sitting alone at a train station, looking lost and afraid, he said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. I had no idea that stopping to help her would be the best decision I ever made. Vivian, you have given me a life beyond anything I could have dreamed. You have loved me through my flaws and mistakes. You have given me children who make me proud every single day. You have built a home that is filled with warmth and laughter. I love you more today than I ever have, and I look forward to spending whatever years we have left continuing to build this beautiful life together. Vivian was crying openly, and Franklin gently wiped away her tears. I love you too, she said. Today, tomorrow, and always. The celebration continued late into the night, with music and dancing and more food than anyone could possibly eat. Franklin danced with Vivian, with his daughters, with his granddaughters, until his feet ached and his sides hurt from laughing. He looked around at all the people gathered there, all the lives that had been touched by his and Vivian's story, and he felt overwhelmed by gratitude. As the years advanced into the 1910s, Franklin and Vivian settled into the comfortable rhythm of grandparenthood. They had 11 grandchildren by 1915, ranging in age from newborn to 20. The ranch was thriving under Frederick's management, and all their children were settled and happy in their chosen pursuits. Franklin was 60 years old now, and Vivian was 58. They both showed the marks of time and hard work, but they were healthy and active. They took daily walks around the property, worked in their garden, and spent long evenings on the porch talking about everything and nothing. One spring afternoon in 1916, Franklin found Vivian in the schoolhouse, which she still used, though she had cut back her teaching to just a few hours per week. She was organizing books, and she turned to smile at him as he entered. "Hello, my love," she said. "What brings you here?" "I was thinking we should take a trip," Franklin said. "We have talked about visiting Boston for years so you could see your old home. What if we went this summer?" Vivian's eyes lit up. "Really? You would do that?" "Of course," Franklin said. "We have the time, and Frederick can manage things here. It would be an adventure, just the two of us." They made the trip in June, traveling by train across the country. It was Vivian's first time back to Boston since she had left 38 years earlier, and Franklin watched her emotions shift between nostalgia and wonder as they walked the streets of her childhood. They visited her father's grave and the school where he had taught, and Vivian cried as she shared memories of her early life. But when the 2 weeks were up, Vivian was ready to go home. "Boston's beautiful," she said as they boarded the train for the return journey, "but it is not home anymore. Home is Oregon, with you and our family." Franklin squeezed her hand. "I'm glad to hear you say that, because I have spent the entire trip missing our porch and our bed." They laughed together, And Franklin realized that this was what true happiness looked like. Not the absence of challenges or hardships, but the presence of someone to share both the joys and sorrows. He had been incredibly fortunate to find that person all those years ago at a dusty train station. The 1920s brought new changes and challenges. The world had been transformed by the Great War, and modern inventions were changing daily life in ways Franklin could scarcely comprehend. Automobiles were becoming common, and Frederick purchased one for the ranch, though Franklin preferred his horses. Electricity had been installed throughout their home, and Vivian marveled at the convenience of electric lights and appliances. But some things remained constant. Franklin and Vivian's love for each other continued to deepen with each passing year. They had weathered so much together, celebrated so many joys, and mourned so many losses that they were truly two halves of a single whole. In 1928, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary with an even larger celebration than their 30th. 3 generations of family gathered, and Franklin looked around at the sea of faces, all descended from or connected to the love he and Vivian shared, and he felt humbled by the legacy they had created. 50 years, Vivian said as they sat together that evening, the celebration winding down around them. Half a century as your wife. The best 50 years of my life. Mine too, Franklin said. Though I have to admit, there were times in those early years when I wondered if you would grow tired of rough ranch life and want something more refined. Never, Vivian said firmly. This life, this place, you, this is where I belong. I knew that from almost the moment we met. Franklin pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. I am a lucky man, he said, the luckiest man who ever lived. As the 1930s dawned, both Franklin and Vivian slowed down considerably. Franklin was 75 years old, and Vivian was 73. They still took daily walks, though the distances were shorter now. They still sat on their porch every evening, watching the sunset and talking quietly. But they also napped more, moved more carefully, and relied on their family for help with tasks that had once been simple. Their children were all established in their own lives, with children and even grandchildren of their own. Frederick was 60 years old himself, a respected pillar of the community who ran the ranch with the same integrity his father had shown. Flora was a retired educator who had influenced hundreds of students over her career. Frances was still practicing veterinary medicine, though she had taken on a partner to handle some of the workload. Thomas was a renowned artist whose work hung in galleries across the country. Franklin and Vivian had been blessed with 16 grandchildren and 7 great-grandchildren, with more on the way. The Reed family had become one of the most prominent and respected families in the region, known for their generosity, integrity, and strong family bonds. One quiet evening in the summer of 1932, Franklin and Vivian sat on their porch, as they had done thousands of times before. Franklin was holding Vivian's hand, running his thumb across her knuckles in a gesture that had become second nature over 54 years of marriage. Do you remember that first day at the station? He asked suddenly. Of course, Vivian said. I remember everything about that day. The heat, the dust, the fear, and then you appeared like an answer to a prayer I had not even known I was praying. I remember thinking you had the most beautiful eyes I had ever seen, Franklin said, green as spring grass, even when they were filled with tears. I remember you saying that no one should be stranded at that station, Vivian said softly. Those words gave me hope when I had none. You made me feel seen and valued when I felt completely worthless. You were never worthless, Franklin said fiercely. You were a treasure waiting to be discovered, and I thank God every day that I was the one who found you. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant colors. Franklin thought about all the moments that had brought them to this place, all the decisions large and small that had shaped their lives. If he had ridden past that station without stopping, if he had not offered to help, if Vivian had refused his assistance, none of this would exist. The children, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren, the ranch, the life they had built together, all of it hinged on that single moment of compassion. I would do it all again, Franklin said suddenly. Every single moment, every challenge, every joy, every sorrow. I would live this exact life again if it meant spending it with you. So would I, Vivian said, tears streaming down her face. "You have been the great love of my life, Franklin Reed. My partner, my best friend, my everything." Franklin leaned over and kissed her, gentle and sweet, a kiss that held 54 years of love and devotion. "And you are mine," he said, "forever and always." As the sun set on another day, Franklin and Vivian remained on their porch, hands intertwined, hearts beating in rhythm. They had built an extraordinary life from a chance encounter at a train station, and they had never taken a single moment of it for granted. Their love had created a legacy that would continue for generations, a testament to the power of compassion, commitment, and choosing each other every single day. The stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, and Franklin thought about the future that stretched out beyond them. He and Vivian would not live forever, but what they had created together would endure. Their children would carry forward the values they had instilled, and their grandchildren would tell stories of the cowboy who stopped to help a stranded young woman and ended up finding the love of his life. It was a good story, Franklin thought, a true story. And the best part was that he had lived every moment of it with the woman he loved more than life itself. As they finally rose to go inside, Franklin took one last look at the land they had built their dreams upon, and he smiled. This was home. This was family. This was love in its purest, most enduring form.